The howling grew closer as Josephine Gable pressed her back against the rough bark of an ancient pine, her breath catching in her throat like a trapped bird. The wolves had been stalking her for nearly an hour, their yellow eyes glinting through the darkening Colorado forest as the autumn sun dipped below the mountains. Montana Territory, 1876. Josephine had only meant to gather herbs for her ailing father before nightfall. Now, as 4 timber wolves emerged from the shadowy underbrush with hackles raised and teeth bared, she knew her gravest mistake had been venturing too far from their homestead. "Stay back," she warned, her voice quavering as she brandished a broken branch. The wolves were undeterred, creeping closer with hungry determination. Josephine's heart hammered in her chest, her calico dress damp with perspiration despite the October chill. The lead wolf, a massive gray creature with a scarred muzzle, lunged forward. Josephine screamed, closing her eyes and bracing for the inevitable tearing of flesh. Instead, the crack of a rifle shot shattered the forest silence. Then another, and another. When she dared to look, the wolves were retreating, one limping from what appeared to be a flesh wound. Standing 20 yards away was a tall figure silhouetted against the fading light, rifle still raised to his shoulder. "You all right, miss?" the man called, his voice deep and cautious. Josephine nodded, unable to find her voice as relief flooded through her veins like spring water. The stranger approached, and as he drew closer, she could make out his features. He was perhaps 30, with a weathered face that had seen its share of sun and hardship. His eyes were a startling blue beneath the brim of his worn leather hat. "Ethan Ashworth," he introduced himself, lowering his Winchester. "Those wolves have been troubling folks all season. Not like them to come this close to people, though. Must be desperate with winter coming on." "Josephine Gable," she replied, finally finding her voice. "I cannot thank you enough, Mr. Ashworth. I thought I was." She couldn't finish the sentence. "No need for thanks." He glanced at the darkening sky. "Sun's almost gone. Where are you headed?" "Gable Homestead, north of Turner Creek." Ethan nodded. "That's a good 3 miles. Not safe to travel alone after dark, especially with those wolves still about. I'll see you home." Josephine wanted to protest that she didn't need charity, but the thought of those yellow eyes watching from the shadows silenced her pride. "I would be grateful." As they began walking, Josephine clutching her basket of yarrow and willow bark, she studied her rescuer from the corner of her eye. His gait was easy but alert, his lean frame hardened by what she guessed was a life spent outdoors. The rifle rested comfortably in the crook of his arm, and a revolver hung at his hip. "You're not from around here," she observed, noticing his saddle and gear were finer than most local cowboys. "Passing through," Ethan replied. "Was trailing a herd north from Texas, but decided to winter in these parts before heading to Montana." "Texas? You've come a long way. We're left little for me back home." The simple statement held volumes of unspoken history. They walked in companionable silence for a while, the forest gradually giving way to rolling meadows bathed in twilight. The first stars appeared overhead, bright pinpricks in the deepening blue. "Those herbs for doctoring?" Ethan asked, nodding toward her basket. Josephine nodded. "My father has a fever that won't break. Our nearest doctor is in Helena, nearly 2 days' ride. I know something about field medicine," Ethan offered. "Learned during the war. Might be able to help." Josephine studied him more carefully. Many drifters passed through these territories, some honest, others looking for easy prey. Something in Ethan's steady gaze told her he fell into the former category. "Pa might appreciate that," she conceded. "He's too stubborn to admit how ill he's become." They crested a small rise, and in the valley below, the lights of the Gable homestead glowed amber against the gathering darkness. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, and the familiar silhouette of their modest cabin and adjacent barn comforted Josephine like an embrace. As they approached, the door swung open. A tall man with a gray-streaked beard leaned heavily against the doorframe, a shotgun visible in his grasp. "Josephine, that you?" His voice was hoarse but strong enough to carry. "It's me, Pa. And, friend." She hesitated on the last word, unsure what to call her rescuer. James Gable scrutinized Ethan with narrowed eyes as they approached. "Who's this stranger you're bringing to our door, girl?" "This is Mr. Ashworth. He drove off wolves that had me cornered in Blackwood Ridge." He's escorted me home safely. Her father's expression softened marginally. Wolves, you say? Getting bold, those beasts. He extended a hand to Ethan. James Gable. Seems I owe you my daughter's life. No debt owed, Ethan replied, shaking the offered hand. Any man would have done the same. Not any man would have hit his mark in failing light, James observed shrewdly. You military trained? Confederate cavalry, Ethan admitted. James nodded slowly. Union infantry myself. But war's long over. Come inside and warm yourself. Least I can do. The cabin was simple but comfortable, warmed by a crackling fire in the stone hearth. The main room served as kitchen, dining room, and living space, with 2 doors leading to what Ethan presumed were bedrooms. Everything was meticulously clean, with handmade quilts and carved wooden furnishings speaking of care and craftsmanship. Sit, James instructed, gesturing to the table as he lowered himself into a chair with a poorly disguised wince. Josephine, fetch our guest some coffee. Ethan watched as Josephine moved confidently around the kitchen, her earlier fear replaced by the easy familiarity of home. She was prettier than he'd first realized, with honey-brown hair tied back in a practical braid and warm hazel eyes. Her hands were capable and strong, though unmistakably feminine. Mr. Ashworth knows something about medicine, Pa, Josephine mentioned as she set steaming cups before them. He offered to look at your fever. James frowned. I'm fine. Just a touch of the ague. You've been fine for 2 weeks, Josephine countered. Your cough is getting worse. Ethan sipped his coffee, watching the familiar dance of stubborn father and determined daughter. It reminded him painfully of his own family, long scattered to the winds after Sherman's march through Georgia. If I may, he interjected, I've seen similar symptoms in men who've caught lung fever. There's a tea made with the herbs your daughter gathered, plus some licorice root if you have it, that might help break the fever. James gave him a long look, then nodded grudgingly. Suppose it couldn't hurt. While Josephine prepared the medicinal tea under Ethan's instruction, the conversation turned to the territory, ranching prospects, and the rumors of gold in the northern mountains. Ethan found himself enjoying the simple family dynamic he'd been without for so long. Where are you camped? James asked eventually. Creekside, about 2 miles west, Ethan replied. Got my horse and gear there. James exchanged a glance with his daughter. Too far to head back tonight with those wolves about. Barn's warm enough if you don't mind bedding down with the horses. I appreciate the offer, Ethan said. Been sleeping under the stars for months. A roof would be welcome. Later, as Josephine showed him to the barn, a lantern lighting their way across the yard, she seemed to struggle with what to say. I never properly thank you, she finally offered. For the wolves, and for helping with Pa. Your father's a proud man. Reminds me of my own. Ethan set his rifle down on a hay bale. The tea should help, but if his fever doesn't break by morning, he might need stronger medicine. We don't have much money, Josephine admitted. But I'm not asking for payment. Ethan interrupted gently. Just trying to help. Their eyes met in the golden lantern light, and something unspoken passed between them. Josephine looked away first, her cheeks coloring slightly. There are blankets on the shelf, she said, and water in the trough is clean. I'll bring breakfast at sunrise. Good night, Miss Gable. Josephine, she corrected with a small smile. You've earned the right to use my Christian name, I think. Then good night, Josephine, Ethan said, returning her smile. And you might as well call me Ethan. Good night, Ethan. She lingered a moment longer than necessary before turning and walking back to the cabin, the lantern light fading with her. Ethan watched until she was safely inside, then settled onto the hay, rifle within reach. The horses nickered softly in their stalls, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. He fell asleep thinking of hazel eyes and wondering why, after years of drifting, he suddenly felt no urgency to move on. Morning arrived with pale golden light filtering through the barn slats. Ethan woke instantly, a habit formed during years of war and wandering. For a moment, he was disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. Then the events of the previous evening came rushing back. He had just finished washing at the water trough when the barn door creaked open. Josephine entered, carrying a tray laden with food. Her face was drawn with exhaustion, dark circles beneath her eyes suggesting a sleepless night. Pa's fever broke around midnight. she said without preamble. He's sleeping peacefully for the first time in days. Relief flooded her features, and Ethan realized how deeply worried she had been. That's good news, he said, accepting the offered tray. The herbs did their work. Your knowledge did the work, she corrected. We are in your debt twice over. Ethan shook his head. No debts between friends. Is that what we are? Friends? There was a tentative note in her voice that made him look up sharply. I'd like to think so, he replied carefully. Josephine nodded, seemingly satisfied with his answer. Eat while it's hot. Pa wants to speak with you when you're finished. The breakfast was simple but hearty: cornbread, bacon, and strong coffee. Ethan ate with appreciation, realizing it was the first home-cooked meal he'd had in months. When he entered the cabin afterward, he found James Gable sitting up in bed, looking markedly improved though still weak. My daughter tells me your remedy worked wonders, James said by way of greeting. Seems I'm further in your debt. As I told Josephine, there's no debt, Ethan replied, taking the offered chair beside the bed. James studied him with shrewd eyes. What brings you to these parts, truly? Most Texas drovers keep to the eastern routes. Ethan considered his answer carefully. I'm looking for something, I suppose. Don't rightly know what. Peace? Purpose? James suggested. Many men wander after war, trying to find what they lost. Maybe, Ethan conceded. Or maybe just a place that feels worth staying. James nodded slowly. Territories full of opportunities for a man willing to work. I've got more land than I can manage these days, especially being laid up like this. Are you offering me work, Mr. Gable? Might be. Winter's coming. My cattle need bringing down from the high pastures. Barn needs repairs before snow flies, and I'm in no condition to do either. James coughed, then continued. Could use an extra hand until spring. Cabin out back needs some work, but it's yours if you want it. Fair wages too. Ethan hadn't planned on staying in one place, yet something about the offer appealed to him. I'll need to fetch my horse and gear. Josephine can ride with you, James said. Show you the property boundaries on the way. Girl knows this land better than I do these days. An hour later, Ethan and Josephine rode side by side across the rolling grassland. She sat a horse well, he noted, with the easy confidence of someone raised in the saddle. She had changed into riding clothes, divided skirt, boots, and a fitted jacket that accentuated her slender waist. Your father's offering me a job seems rather sudden, Ethan remarked as they crested a rise overlooking a vast expanse of golden autumn prairie. Pa's a good judge of character, Josephine replied. Always has been. Says he can tell an honest man by the way he holds himself. She glanced at him. Besides, we genuinely need the help. Since Ma died 3 years ago, it's been just the two of us. The ranch is too much work for one man, let alone an aging one with a stubborn streak. And what do you think of his decision? Ethan asked, curious about her perspective. Josephine considered this. I think, she began slowly, that it's the first sensible thing he's done in months. A smile tugged at her lips. And I think having someone else to argue with might give me some peace. Ethan laughed, surprised at how natural it felt. I'm not much for arguing. We'll see about that, she teased. Pa can try the patience of a saint. They reached Ethan's camp by mid-morning. It was sparse, just a bedroll, saddlebags, and the remains of a small fire. His horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding, grazed nearby, raising its head at their approach. As Ethan gathered his belongings, Josephine wandered to the edge of the creek, admiring the clear water rushing over smooth stones. Did you really come all the way from Texas? She asked. Started there, Ethan replied, securing his bedroll. Been wandering since '65. Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, California for a spell, then back east through Colorado. Never stayed anywhere longer than a season. That sounds lonely, she observed. Ethan paused. No one had ever put it quite so plainly before. Suppose it has been, he admitted. But it's hard to settle when nothing feels like home anymore. And what did home feel like? Josephine asked, her voice gentle. The question caught him off guard. Family mostly. Safety. Purpose. He finished packing and straightened. Lost the plantation during the war. Father died at Shiloh. Mother followed a year later. 2 brothers never came back from Petersburg. I'm sorry, Josephine said simply. It was a lifetime ago, Ethan replied, though they both knew it wasn't entirely true. They rode back more slowly, Josephine pointing out landmarks and sharing the history of the ranch. Her grandfather had been among the first settlers in the territory, staking a claim that had grown to nearly 1,000 acres over the years. Pa was supposed to be a lawyer, she explained as they passed a stand of aspens, their leaves shimmering gold in the sunlight. Went east to school and everything. But when Grandpa died, he came back to run the ranch. Met my mother here, she was the schoolteacher in Helena. They built this place together. And you? Ethan asked. Did you ever want something different? Josephine smiled wistfully. I went to school in Denver for a year. Thought I might become a teacher like Ma. But then she took sick, and I came home. She shrugged. Dreams change, I suppose. Back at the ranch, James had risen from bed and was sitting on the porch, wrapped in a quilt despite the mild day. He watched with approval as Ethan immediately set to work examining the barn roof that clearly needed repair. Over the next week, Ethan fell into the rhythm of ranch life. He rose before dawn to tend to the horses and milk the cow, repaired fences and the barn roof, and spent long days bringing cattle down from the higher pastures before the first snowfall. Each evening, he would join the Gables for dinner, contributing his share of the conversation, but mostly enjoying the warm family atmosphere he had missed for so long. Josephine, he discovered, was far more than just a rancher's daughter. She was educated and well-read, with opinions on everything from politics to poetry. In the evenings, she often read aloud while her father whittled by the fire. Her voice, clear and expressive, brought the words to life in a way that made Ethan look forward to those quiet hours. James's health improved steadily, but the older man was wise enough to let Ethan handle the more strenuous tasks. Instead, he shared his knowledge of ranching in this territory, which grasses fattened cattle best, how to predict weather from the behavior of wildlife, where the water ran even in the driest summers. As October gave way to November, the first snow dusted the mountains. Ethan had moved into the small cabin behind the main house, adding a proper stone chimney and replacing the leaky roof. The space, just one room with a sleeping loft, felt more like home than anywhere he'd stayed since the war. One crisp morning, as frost rimed the grass and their breath fogged in the cold air, Ethan and Josephine rode to check on a pregnant heifer that had separated from the herd. We should be able to see her from that ridge, Josephine said, pointing to a rocky outcrop ahead. She likes to calve in the sheltered draw beyond it. As they reached the top of the ridge, however, it wasn't the heifer that caught their attention. In the valley below, a small group of riders was approaching the ranch, 5 men, moving with purpose. Do you recognize them? Ethan asked, instinctively reaching for his rifle. Josephine shaded her eyes. The one in front might be Victor Rains. Owns the big spread east of here. Been trying to buy our water rights for years. Your father mentioned him. Said he doesn't take no for an answer. Pa's refused to sell no matter how much Rains offers, Josephine explained, her expression troubled. Our creek is the only reliable water source for miles in dry years. Without it, Rains would have to drive his cattle 20 miles to drink. They watched as the riders reached the ranch house. James came out onto the porch, and even from a distance, his posture was clearly unwelcoming. We should head back, Josephine said, turning her horse. They rode hard, covering the distance in half the usual time. As they approached, they could hear raised voices. James stood on the porch, shotgun now in hand, facing down the mounted men. Told you before, Rains, this land isn't for sale. Not the water rights, not an acre, not a blade of grass, James was saying as Ethan and Josephine dismounted. Victor Rains, a corpulent man with an expensive coat and a florid face, sneered down from his horse. You're being unreasonable, Gable. I'm offering twice what this rock pile is worth. Problem here? Ethan asked, stepping forward to stand beside James, his rifle held casually but visibly. Rains's eyes narrowed. Who's this? Hired gun, Gable? Ranch hand, James replied evenly. And a friend. Well, friend, Rains said, his tone making the word an insult. This is private business between Mr. Gable and myself. Any business with the Gables concerns me, Ethan replied, his voice level but with an edge that made 2 of Rains's men shift uncomfortably in their saddles. Josephine moved to stand on her father's other side, her own rifle now in hand. The tableau held for a tense moment 3 defenders on the porch, facing 5 mounted men. Rains finally broke the silence with a harsh laugh. You think this is over, Gable? Winter's coming. Hard times for a small spread like yours. Might find yourself in need of cash when the snow gets deep. He wheeled his horse around. I'll be back with a new offer after first blizzard. Might not be as generous. They watched in silence as the riders departed, dust rising from their horses' hooves. Charming neighbor, Ethan remarked dryly. James sighed, the confrontation having clearly taxed his still recovering strength. Rains has been after our water rights since he moved in 5 years ago. Man doesn't understand the meaning of no. Will he cause trouble? Ethan asked. Hard to say. He's all bluster usually, but... James frowned. Something felt different this time. More desperate. That evening, as Josephine brought dinner to Ethan's cabin, the confrontation with Rains still weighed on them. Pa's worried, she admitted as they sat before the fire. He won't say it, but I can tell. Rains has connections and Helena friends in the territorial government. Your water rights are legal? Ethan asked. Fully documented. Grandfather filed all the proper claims. She pushed her food around her plate. But papers only matter if there's law to back them up. Out here, that can be flexible. Ethan nodded, understanding all too well how justice could bend to wealth and influence. I won't let anything happen to you or your father, he said simply. Josephine looked up, her eyes reflecting the firelight. Why do you care so much? You barely know us. It was a fair question, one Ethan had been asking himself. When I rode into this territory, I was just passing through. Another place on the way to nowhere. He met her gaze steadily. But something changed when I found you in those woods. For the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I needed to be. The admission hung between them, more revealing than he had intended. Josephine set her plate aside and moved to sit beside him on the bench. I'm glad you were where you needed to be, she said softly. Not just because you saved me from the wolves. Her proximity made Ethan acutely aware of his own heartbeat. They had worked side by side for weeks now, shared meals and conversations, but always with James present or the work of the ranch between them. This quiet moment alone felt significant in ways he couldn't articulate. Josephine, he began, then faltered, uncertain of what he wanted to say. She saved him from his awkwardness by placing her hand over his. I know you're not planning to stay forever, she said, but I want you to know that you've brought something back to this ranch that's been missing since Ma died. Not just the extra hands for work, but life, laughter. Ethan turned his hand to clasp hers. I haven't felt like I belonged anywhere since the war. Until here. Their eyes met, and the distance between them seemed both vast and infinitesimal. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Ethan leaned forward. Their lips met in a kiss that began tentatively but quickly deepened with a hunger that surprised them both. When they finally separated, breathless, Josephine's cheeks were flushed. I should go, she whispered, though she made no move to leave. Pa will wonder where I am. Stay, Ethan said, the word carrying more meaning than just the moment. Not, he clarified quickly. I mean, just a little longer. To talk. Josephine smiled, understanding. To talk, she agreed, settling back beside him, closer now. They spoke late into the night, sharing stories of their lives before they met. Ethan told her of his childhood in Texas, of the war that had destroyed everything he knew, and of his years of wandering. Josephine spoke of her mother's death, her brief time at school in Denver, and her dreams for the ranch's future. When she finally rose to leave, the fire had burned low. Ethan walked her to the door, where they shared another kiss, this one gentle and full of promise. Good night, Ethan, she said, her voice warm with affection. Good night, Josephine, he replied, watching until she reached the main house safely. The next few weeks passed in a blur of work and deepening connection. As November's chill settled over the land, Ethan and the Gables prepared for winter in earnest, smoking meat, storing root vegetables, ensuring the buildings were weather-tight. Through it all, the bond between Ethan and Josephine grew stronger, their stolen moments together becoming the highlight of each day. James, far from being oblivious, observed their budding romance with quiet approval. One evening, as Ethan helped him repair a harness by the fire, the older man broached the subject directly. My daughter seems happier than I've seen her in years, he remarked casually. Wouldn't have anything to do with you, would it? Ethan looked up, momentarily at a loss for words. Sir, James waved away his stammering. I was young once too, you know. I recognized the signs. His expression grew serious. Josephine's everything to me. Lost her mother, lost her chances at the education she deserved because of my needs. She deserves happiness. She deserves the world, Ethan agreed quietly. Question is, James continued, are you planning to be part of that world? Or will you be moving on come spring? It was the question Ethan had been asking himself with increasing frequency. When I came here, I had no intention of staying, he admitted. But now, James prompted. Now I can't imagine being anywhere else. James nodded, satisfied. Good, because I'm not getting any younger, and this ranch needs a future. He returned his attention to the harness. Just so we understand each other. The first major snowstorm hit in early December, blanketing the ranch in 2 feet of powder and forcing them to stay close to the buildings. During those confined days, Ethan helped James organize years of accumulated tools and supplies in the barn, while Josephine worked on Christmas preparations in the house. On the 3rd day, as the storm finally abated, Ethan was alone in the barn when he heard horses approaching. Moving cautiously to the door, he saw 3 riders making their way through the deep snow. Even bundled against the cold, he recognized Victor Rains at the lead. Ethan quickly retrieved his rifle from where it hung on the wall and made his way to the main house. He found James and Josephine already at the window, watching the approaching riders. Rains, James confirmed grimly. Right on schedule after the first blizzard, as promised. Let me handle this, Ethan said, checking his rifle. James shook his head. This is my fight. My land. Our land, Josephine corrected firmly. And Ethan's as much a part of this ranch now as either of us. The 3 of them stepped onto the porch as Rains and his men dismounted. The cattle baron looked even more imposing in his heavy winter coat, his breath steaming in the frigid air. Gable, he called out. Hope you weathered the storm all right. Might be a good time to reconsider my offer. My answer hasn't changed, Rains, James replied. Not for sale. Not now, not ever. Rains's affable expression hardened. I tried to be reasonable. Offered you fair market value, and then some. He gestured to his men, who spread out slightly. But my cattle need water, and your creek is the only reliable source for 10 miles. One way or another, I'm going to have access to it. Are you threatening us? Josephine demanded, stepping forward. Just stating facts, Miss Gable. Territorial Records Office had a small fire last week. Tragic, really. Lot of property documents damaged. Rains smiled coldly. Including, I'm told, the original water rights filings for this area. James went pale. That's impossible. Those documents are legally binding. Hard to bind what doesn't exist anymore, Rains replied smugly. My lawyers are already filing new claims based on the size of my herd and acreage. By spring, this creek will be legally mine. Ethan had heard enough. He stepped forward, rifle held casually but ready. You arrange for those records to be destroyed, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. That's a federal offense. Prove it, Rains challenged. Just an unfortunate accident as far as anyone can tell. I've met men like you before, Ethan continued. Men who think their money puts them above the law, who take what isn't theirs because they can. And I've met men like you, Cowboy, Rains sneered. Drifters who think a gun and a stare make them important. You're nothing, just passing through like all the rest. No, Ethan said firmly. I'm not passing through. This is my home now. These people are my family. He raised his rifle slightly. And I protect what's mine. The declaration hung in the frigid air. Behind him, he felt rather than saw Josephine's reaction a small intake of breath, a shift in her stance that brought her closer to his side. One of Rains's men nervously moved his hand toward his holster, but Rains himself remained still, assessing the situation with calculating eyes. You're outnumbered, Rains finally said, though with less confidence than before. Am I? Ethan replied calmly. As if on cue, the sound of approaching horses made everyone turn. Coming up the snow-covered path were 4 riders' neighbors from nearby ranches, led by a gray-haired man Ethan recognized as Henry Walsh, whose property bordered the Gables to the west. Thought we might find you here, Rains, Walsh called out as they approached. News travels fast, even in a blizzard. This doesn't concern you, Walsh, Rains snapped. When you try to steal a neighbor's water rights by burning government records, it concerns all of us, Walsh replied, dismounting and walking to stand beside the Gables and Ethan. The other ranchers followed suit. Rains's face contorted with fury. You can't prove anything. Maybe not, Walsh agreed. But Marshal Davis and Helena might be interested in comparing the timing of that fire with your whereabouts. And I reckon the territorial governor would be mighty interested to hear how one of his biggest campaign contributors is conducting business. The standoff stretched taut as a fiddle string. Finally, Rains gestured sharply to his men. This isn't over, he warned as he mounted his horse. Yes, it is, James said firmly. Try anything else against my family or my property, and you'll answer not just to the law, but to every rancher in this valley. They watched in silence as Rains and his men rode away, their figures gradually disappearing into the snowy landscape. Thank you, Henry, James said, turning to Walsh. How did you know? Walsh grinned. Rains tried the same trick with the Petersons last year. We've been watching him since we heard about the fire. He nodded respectfully to Ethan. You've got yourself a good man here, James. Stood his ground like he was born to it. After the neighbors departed with promises to remain vigilant, the three returned to the warmth of the cabin. James stoked the fire while Josephine prepared coffee, the routine domestic tasks helping to settle their nerves after the confrontation. Did you mean what you said? Josephine asked Ethan when her father stepped outside to bring in more firewood. About this being your home? About us being your family. Ethan took her hands in his. Every word, he said. I've been running for so long, Josephine. From the war, from memories, from myself. But these past weeks with you and your father I've found something I thought was lost forever. What's that? She asked softly. Peace. Purpose. He smiled. Home. Josephine's eyes shimmered with emotion. I love you, Ethan Ashworth. I think I have since that day in the woods. I love you too, he replied, the words coming easier than he'd expected. Enough to stop wandering. Enough to stay. When James returned, he found them by the fire, hands clasped, speaking quietly of the future. Their future. Together. The winter passed with no further trouble from Rains. The community had rallied around the Gables, making it clear that any action against one ranch would be met with unified resistance from all. By February, word came that the territorial governor had ordered an investigation into the records office fire, and Rains had suddenly become preoccupied with business in California. On a clear, crisp morning in early March, with the first hints of spring beginning to soften the frozen landscape, Ethan asked James for permission to marry Josephine. The older man, looking healthier than he had in years, gave his blessing without hesitation. That evening, as the sunset painted the snow-covered mountains in hues of pink and gold, Ethan took Josephine to the ridge where they had first spotted Rains approaching the ranch months before. Now, instead of tension and worry, the moment was filled with hope. I never expected to find you, Ethan said, holding both her hands in his as they faced each other. I was lost for so long, Josephine, just wandering from place to place with no direction. And now, she asked, her breath visible in the cold air. Now I know exactly where I belong. He dropped to one knee in the snow. Josephine Gable, will you marry me? Will you build a life with me here, on this land you love so much? Her answer was immediate and joyful. Yes, she said, pulling him to his feet and into her arms. Yes, Ethan Ashworth, I will marry you. Their kiss was sealed with the promise of all the years to come, years of hard work and happiness, challenges and triumphs, all faced together on the land that had brought them to each other. As they rode back to the ranch, hand in hand on their horses, Ethan reflected on the strange twist of fate that had led him to this moment. A woman cornered by wolves, a rifle shot in the fading light, a simple act of walking her home. From those ordinary circumstances had grown something extraordinary, a love that had given a wandering soul a place to belong at last.